I would like to call the Board of Education special meeting with the Board of Finance to order. Has the Board of Education had a chance to review the agenda?
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I so move.
Thank you, Pam. Is there a second? Thank you, Lori. All in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. I'd like to thank and invite the Board of Finance for joining us tonight. This is a yearly tradition around the budget, and it's one that's welcomed. Thank you for submitting your questions. I look forward to having a really good discussion around them tonight. Tim, can you hear us okay?
Just need to start the button.
That's not promising. No audio. Is
No? Okay.
Oh, we gotta start, that's why.
Okay.
Can
So
you-
the camera is there for Zoom. Hey, Tim, can you hear us?
No.
That's not promising.
No.
I'm glad I asked.
Yeah, sure.
There you go.
Oh, there we go.
Tim, can you hear us?
Testing 1, 2.
Maybe.
You're on.
Perfect.
Fantastic. I love that. Can you hear us now? It harkens back to those old Verizon commercials. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for everybody being here tonight. And Matt, if you had anything you want to say before we get going.
Sure. Just wanted to extend our gratitude on behalf of the Board of Finance, to the Board of Education, and particularly to the superintendent, to the all the administrators here. I know the budget process is long and hard and maybe even a little bit painful, just a little. But I appreciate all the hard work that goes into it and all the thought process. Appreciate the answers to our questions as well. Also, I wanted to mention we've gotten a bunch of emails from the public, which is great. People should continue emailing us. Please come speak after this meeting and after all the other meetings. That's excellent. The one thing I would add is some of the recent emails we've received have referenced the Board of Finance making a cut to 4%. That is not true. That has not happened. The Board of Finance has not met since January 9th. This budget was released on January 11th. So we have not had a discussion or a meeting about that. Now that said, if you still have thoughts that you want us to hear, your perspectives on what the budget represents and what's in it, please reach out to us about that. But there has been no discussion from the Board of Finance, and there will not be tonight either. This is a forum for us to listen and learn, which we are excited to do.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to say terrific modeling for the rest of us. So folks here in the room tonight, I was just sharing with my colleagues here at the table that I wind up reverting to my inside whisper voice that I've developed over many years as an elementary school teacher. And so I'll do my best, like Matt, to project so people can hear. And Tim, we're assuming you can hear us just fine as well?
I can hear you fine.
Terrific, that's great. Thank you. So in trying to set up a conversation, what I propose to Ruth is that we use the document I just shared with you, and I'll walk us through it. Certainly won't go through every line in detail that's in it. You asked many questions. Many of them are detailed questions. The Board of Education has done the same. But what I would propose is I'll start to walk us through, and I think let's just have a conversation about the questions. If you want to follow up on something, to the extent that we're prepared to give you a follow-up answer, we will. If we're not able to, then we'll just note it, and we'll, again, continue to respond in writing. So all that being said, and also to Matt's comment a minute ago, and to your first question, what are the trade-offs of shifting the budget increase to 5% growth, 4%, 3%, 2%, so on? Was a budget put together to arrive at the 4% increase? When I presented the budget proposal, the initial budget proposal to the Board of Education back on January 11th, I started with, what really was my heart's desire, which would have been to present to you a 4% budget, which was at or around guidance. And I simply wasn't able to do that. And the reason, I chose not to do that because a lot of our budget choices are values choices. I chose not to do that because I didn't believe, and I don't believe, that a budget at 4% will allow us to deliver the quality programming that our students currently enjoy. And so the Board of Education didn't get a 4% increased budget, okay? And I tried to make that case to them in the presentation, and, through your questions, we'll talk through some of those components. I think, as you know, and it doesn't require any belaboring, the majority of our budget is tied up in staff, and it comes in the form of salaries and benefits. And when I was doing my own budget preparation work, I used this example in that presentation with the Board of Education. When you look at our teacher experience grid, and I just focused on the certified staff because that's our largest group. Stuart, that was a document you became familiar with when we went through the last teacher contract negotiation. What we see today is that 65% of our staff are sitting on the top steps in the contract. Year over year, that number is going to grow to 75%, and it's that shift when people move to the highest salaries that we pay that drives some of the major increases year over year. You also see when you look at the projections, that flattens out as people move on, so you don't see the continued kind of year over year growth, at least in terms of salaries, that we're experiencing from this year to the fiscal '25. So anyway, coming back around to kind of where we are to your first question. We've also been, what I would consider managing lean budgets year over year, and in the past we have had opportunities to make reductions in non-labor areas. And as recently as last year, we took a big chunk from the medical. We were able to do that through the provider shift that we made. Those non-labor reductions don't exist to the same magnitude today as they did even a year ago or in years past. And so contemplating the question, Patrick and some others had asked a similar question about where would you go if you had more or less. I prepared a memo for them, and a lot of the communication we got, I believe, was in response to that memo. And so just to highlight for you, I want to be clear about a few things. I've said to Ruth and I've said to others, number one, it's never been my practice personally to play games or to introduce scare tactics or try to influence a crowd a certain way with decisions or choices or options that I'm not serious about. And so I'm going to tell you today, and I was serious a year ago, I put these items on the table to signal to all of you and to everybody else who's listening or watching, this is where we are, right? We may have an opportunity to pick up some additional budget reductions in non-labor areas, which we'll talk about in more detail a little later. You've probably heard us talk about, certainly the Board of Ed is familiar with the technology equipment leasing proposal that's hopefully going to receive approval from the Board of Selectmen. That would be an immediate $200,000 reduction. We're in the midst of a transportation analysis. If we can take a couple of buses out of service, that could yield another 190 if we can take two. So those things, have to be finalized. But if they are, then that would result in a net reduction of, that total amount, 390. There may be a few other areas that we're exploring that'll yield some additional savings, but nothing, of any major magnitude. So if we're looking to make major reductions, then we have to look at where our greatest cost is, which is staff. And so I laid out, and I think just, if people are confused or concerned, I tried to make the point to say, this is not a recommendation by me, it's not a plan. We would need, if we have to reduce the budget, I'll go back with my administrative team, with our instructional leaders, and we'll really have very hard conversations, because in my opinion, this is all a choice among good things in our school system that we would have to choose to let go of or reduce. So anyway, I just wanted to paint the picture and give people a landscape of the kinds of things that, as superintendent, I would be looking at. And so those things are staffing. So in the administrative ranks, it would be the Director of Digital Learning position. We have a small stipend, elementary classroom FTE. I would look at other program areas, physical education, music, instructional coach. That was a question somebody raised. We reduced an instructional coach already in this last budget cycle. World language. We would look at overtime. We would look at additional time. We'd look at athletics, as we should, because we want to consider every single area of our comprehensive educational program. none of the choices are good. All of the choices have ramifications, but again, that's where we are today. And so I offered this to you. I copy and pasted it into that question document just for your convenience. But I'm happy, if there's anything within that you want to focus on or call out, I'm happy to talk more about it.
I guess I'll follow on, I'll kick it off with, I think it's new information since this was sent in, but in looking at some of the list of proposed reductions, freshman sports was on the list, which candidly surprised me. And as someone that went to this school, I wrestled right over there as a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. It just struck me as a surprise, and I'm just curious as I kind of think about the budget. If there's a 4% increase and you don't want to touch staff, right, that would imply that the remaining piece of the budget needs to grow 6.4%. And so if you're, like, why would freshman sports be the first place to go if there were certain areas that are growing a lot faster than the staff?
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily choose freshman sports. I think, as a philosophy, I look across all of our programs, and, as we've had to come back and make reductions in previous years, my approach, and I think I've had, agreement and consensus with my leadership team, that rather than reduce or eliminate any one area, and I would include freshman sports as part of all sports, I'd rather reduce than eliminate any one single area. And so looking at, if we were going to take across-the-board reductions, I would look at athletics in the same way I would look at clubs and activities, right? That is part of our comprehensive program, but it's not, the center of our core mission to teach, literacy and things like that. And so it would be a reduction of a program, not an elimination of an entire program.
Got it. So just, I forget the number, but it was like $70,000.
Yeah, it wasn't, it's a.
Is that all freshman sports, or is that just?
This would be that's all the stipends, yeah, and travel. Right, and you can see too, like if you look up the list, so reduction of overtime, it's not a ton of money, $79,000. It's a small area, but when we get to reductions, we start with the largest areas that are going to have the biggest bang for the buck, and then we work to the smallest areas. And so you can see that down the list as well.
Tim, could I just start off with just a maybe high-level question and a statement? This is my 6th year doing this, and I think there have been points in time when I felt that we either got the conversation started in the wrong place, or there was perhaps too much division between perhaps the theory of education from the Board of Education versus the theory of perhaps conservative budgeting from the Board of Finance. So, what I may have learned in the past few years is that the majority, in terms of the demographics of the town, so we now have a majority of the town that doesn't have children in the school system. But having said that, and I wrote this in a question, but having said that, I believe the majority of the town wants to have an excellent school system because it's closely linked to the value of their homes. So I do believe that we're all sort of fighting for the same thing. We're all fighting to have great schools here, and perhaps the one perspective at the most reasonable value or price possible. My bottom line, my baseline, I'd say, when we were talking about guidance, was that having participated in the teacher's contract negotiation, the number that we arrived at was roughly 4% per year over 3 years. And I thought, given what's occurred in the past, we had arrived at a level where perhaps we were at a place where we had positioned ourselves with an excellent staff at roughly the right level. With the exception of there might have been more opportunities to revert back to pre-pandemic teacher to student levels. But having said that, my overall evaluation was we should have roughly the 4% as a baseline. So when you look at the 4%, which is the increase for existing in place, what has changed other than the 4 additions that we talked about?
Yeah, it's
because I think when Matt was asking the question, everything else would have to gone up close to 7%. And I understand, I've spoken to Ruth about some of the individual needs for example, English as a second language staffing. But when you think about it from a high level, are the base staff before any additions when you look at the ins and outs in terms of, I guess there are 17 people who left and you have new people that came in, is the base staff level of roughly 570 FTEs growing at a rate that's higher than 4%? Is that a big driver in terms of compensation?
Yeah, in my examination, the real shift in the bump that we see that really drove salaries beyond that is the jump that is made of the staff moving from the top step, from the penultimate step to the top step. And so it's that 65% to 75% that really drove I think inflated that salary number. Because
Do we know what the percentage is? So the base staff, before you have the additions, do we know just on salary, how much that has gone up as a percentage?
I'd have to go back and look at it. It's all embedded in that
But
tax
it's higher
document.
than the 4%, as you believe.
It is, yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
And, I think, and then beyond that, there are other inflationary costs that we deal with. So that, within the special education budget, some of the contracted increases just go up well beyond 4%. So, I don't
And the
think.
primary impact is the benefits primarily driven by the insurance.
That's right.
Is that,
Yeah, and we were looking, so, we had estimated in our early forecast growth of between 5 and 8%, and we're at 8%, right? Which if, claims improve or stay stable.
are we going to go over that separately? I don't want to jump ahead too far.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
it's embedded here in some of the questions.
Okay.
But I think, those are the two pieces that really drive, are the major drivers of the budget
And those are based
increase.
upon
Oh,
estimates.
sorry.
Those are based upon estimates, because we have effectively self-insurance.
Correct.
So these are projections.
Based on claims history, that's right.
And the one thing, again, I wrote in one of my questions, was trying to get an evaluation of actual versus budget. So for the existing year, and I realize we're not that, we may not have, we've got about half a year of history at this point. But when you look at those significant driver items, particularly the health benefits, is there an indication there that we are exceeding the budget for this year, and therefore that's the reason for the health insurance to be going up by such a significant percentage for next year?
The information comes from our broker, and it's based on our current claims history and what they're forecasting as the associated
Yeah.
costs.
Well, I'd say, again, Matt was asking the same question, but for me, I perhaps thrive maybe a little too much on data. So it would be great if we could just get the percentage of the increase of in-place salaries. So for existing staff, how much that went up by, and in terms of replacement staff, I'd normally expect that if we lost 17 professionals, we would have hired perhaps people at the same level or less, and not necessarily higher. And then
Correct.
beyond that, I understand there's the addition of 4.5 FTEs, so maybe to be able to see that, what the percentage increases are separately.
Sure.
As well as the actual run rate on the insurance, and any other significant drivers that you might be able to point us to.
Yep, you got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of the total salary increase across the budget, the new FTE are a minimal part of that. It's really driven by existing staff and
Right.
their movement. But sure, I'll share the tag with you. And then the run rate of Anything else on that?
One question, if you're covering later on, I saw something here, so there's like $500,000 of stipend reduction that you talked about.
You're talking about in that first question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that, so I believe, the reason I'm asking this is because there's been a lot of reaction and perception that that's going to cut all the clubs. So I believe that is really not true. There's like a lot of other things for which you pay stipend.
We do. So clubs and activities are included with that. So if you take if you go into our operating budget and look at the total stipended line, so for everybody, stipends are additional payments made to staff to do various different responsibilities beyond their primary roles. So in many cases, teachers will perform some duties as a team leader, as an instructional leader, so these are additional responsibilities to help coordinate and lead the programming within the schools. There are also other stipends that we pay to clubs and activities, and so that again is contracted money paid to, run the various co-curriculars that our kids participate in. So if you take that whole line and cut it in half, and that's the number I gave to you here, that would be just an across-the-board 50% reduction of payments, which would mean 50% of time given to those varied responsibilities, whether they are running clubs and activities, leading some of the instructional leader or team leader activities that we do, or the other handful of different stipends that we pay.
So maybe with the numbers being big, and that's probably the perception is like everything's going to go away, but that's not true.
No, and I think so again, just to use, this year as an example, when we were reconciling the budget, we made the decision, among other decisions, to specifically focus on clubs and activities. And again, the bigger picture thinking there was, rather than eliminate any one thing, and we did go back, particularly here at the high school, and look at subscription rates for all of the various clubs and activities that are run. And so if there were, some seriously undersubscribed clubs, those probably weren't run again. But generally speaking, rather than eliminate, it was, how can we do, kind of less impact? And so run them on a half-time schedule across the year. There were a couple of instances to some of our, really important clubs that we run. So the Morning Warrior is one of the clubs that's run for years here. They operate the high school TV show. The advisor just concluded that he couldn't do a good job in the amount of time that was allotted. The gentleman who ran the debate club felt the same way, and so they stepped back from that. So those clubs didn't have advisors. So those clubs haven't run.
And so I think to some extent what we're seeing, at least this year, is some of the unforeseen or unintended consequences of how we kind of structure or manage kind of this lean environment that that we're living in. So that was the way when the way it was structured to begin with, and the reduction, half time, trying to make sure that there still remains something for everybody, which is one of the things that, in Wilton, and especially in the high school, we try to pride ourselves on, that there's a space and a place for all students. And in service to that, I think there were things that fell away that we weren't anticipated. And I think that's one of the continuing challenges as, we work through this process.
How do you think about, I realize all these trade-offs are obviously very difficult, but how do you think about these selective pruning? So for example, when I read in Good Morning Wilton that that some of the clubs were cut, and Ruth, when we talked about it, I think it was around $190,000, $200,000. How do you think about when you were cutting that? Is that because there's lack of demand, or is that because those are the least subscribed to clubs, or was there just an across the board? And if it was across the board, how were they selected? Were they selected because the people who were involved from the administration of those clubs no longer wanted to do it for whatever the stipend was that was being offered? How are those selected?
Yeah, so, again, we're trying to get to, a number, a magnitude. Yeah. I'm just reflecting on, last year's circumstance. And so we needed to come up with whatever the number was, $1.4 million over, a range of reductions. And so given the few choices that were on the table, we looked at that, and there is no, in my opinion, there's no equitable way. I mean, you could look at subscription, I suppose, but different clubs attract different things. And so, philosophically, I think our schools try to be all things to all kids to the best extent they can be. And so if you listen to some of the conversation and the workshops we had about this, right, for some of these clubs, even though there might only be a handful of kids in them, these are the things that get kids to school every day, right? So how do you weigh value? when it might be the single most meaningful thing, even though there's, only 6 kids there. So I think from kind of an equity perspective, that's a very hard thing to do, to say we're gonna do this club or not that club. So then the default proposition, in my opinion, becomes across the board. So that way, no single club is singled out for any reason, because they all have value to those kids that participate. And so then I just looked at the schedule. If the expectation was that they met once a week for the 40 weeks school were in session, you cut that in half and say, all right, so now you're gonna take half the stipend with the expectation that the club will meet half the time. And so clubs operate on, an every other week type schedule. And the feedback that we've heard from, a fair number of kids and some parents as well is that that's just not working for some kids. The frequency's not enough. It's not enough to really develop that esprit de corps that happens so naturally in so many clubs when kids are coming together each week to work on, whatever it is they love or they're trying to pursue. So, but I don't know another better way to do it.
So how is that? I know that since the pandemic, we had talked about the student to teacher ratios. And so when we talk about potentially cutting out freshman sports, I think that would be incredibly unpopular. If you talk about cutting out music, I think that would be incredibly unpopular. And frankly, I believe that the clubs were probably very unpopular. I don't have a student at the school anymore, but I believe that would have been unpopular when my kids were here. So how do you weigh that relative to, we know that our student to teacher ratios have improved. So they've gotten better. There are more teachers per, fewer students per teacher. But if we went back, it would be something like, based upon the charts that I saw, there would be roughly a 10% change if you reverted back to pre-pandemic levels. And I don't know what that means in terms of total staffing, but that is perhaps another option. How do you think about that option relative to this curtailing of clubs and sports? And
I don't think the formula works, and I say that because if you look at where staffing is and what staff does, it's diverse. So then you have to drill into, particular roles. So one place, and I included it here, that we would examine is, just look at K-5 classroom teachers, right? And again, I offer that as an example because they're easy to quantify. We know how many there are. We can compute class averages very simply. And so if we looked across sections and we reduced one, then you impact class averages. And so what's the impact of adding 1 or 2 more kids to a classroom? I would be hard pressed to generalize that because every kid is different, every class is different, every class composition is different. I did labor to explain in this document, and you can read it at your convenience, about why class size matters. And I think one of the nuances that we don't capture at a high level is the complexity of the classroom. And so as an indicator of change, I did share with the Board of Ed, if you just, again, looking at numbers, if you look at our special education incidence rate, so the number of kids who have IEPs, back in 18-19, that number was something like 14.1 or 14.2%. Today it's 17.6. So the number of kids, even though our total population is decreasing, the number of kids with more complex needs is growing. And so in most cases, if it's kind of a generalized learning disability, that can be managed by a skilled classroom teacher with some support. In lots of other cases, we have kids with many very complex needs that require a whole team around them. So stepping back and just saying, well, what if we just reduce staff by 10%? I don't know where I would go. So who would I, where would I make those decisions? Because I can't make the decision around any child with an IEP that requires a team, a paraprofessional, speech and language pathologist, whatever. Their hours are written into the IEPs. So then who else am I looking at that point? You've got classroom teachers, you've got other certified staff, you've got instructional coaches, library learning commons people, all of those folks that, maybe not necessarily tied to an IEP. And then you need to put on the table the rest of our goals. I tried to write this to you too in a simple way, and we've had a lot of conversation about instructional coaches in recent years and in recent days, and people, I think, questioning the value of their role, and, you know, maybe not in isolation, but relative to having to make hard choices. And I would ask you all, I would ask our folks here today, what is our primary purpose as a public school system? That's not a rhetorical question. Well, what is it? In my opinion, our job is to maximize academic attainment for kids, right? We want our kids to get the best education possible. We can debate about what core means, and for me, I've defined core as our comprehensive educational program, which includes reading, writing, literacy, all of the new literacies, all of the social emotional skills, the athletics, the clubs, and everything else that rolls up to what we provide as an educational system. To me, that's core. But if you want to kind of boil it down, kids need to be prepared to go on to college, to work, whatever their next chapter is. One of the best indicators of success is a student's GPA. In a very rigorous school system, a high GPA means a lot more than coming out of a system where it's not that rigorous. And so when I talk about and think about what our instructional coaches do, their job is to support our instructional staff so that way we reduce variability across classrooms and we maximize the potential for educational attainment. We do that by skilling up and supporting our teachers so they can do their very best job in front of the kids that they have, for the time that they have them. We can go on to debate why only math and literacy and why not other subject areas, and, you know, what about the teachers we have who haven't had the benefit or the experience of working with an instructional coach? We're in a fiscally limited environment, and so we have to make choices. And again, if you've looked at our recent history, we needed to work on our literacy curriculum. We needed to work on our math curriculum. And, you know, today, right, we've done quite a bit of work coming out of the pandemic to support our staff, to grow achievement, to address learning gaps. Last year, we had the number one rating on the State Accountability Index in the entire, out of 168 districts. This year, we're number 6. We're still very high. We had the top math and language arts scores at the high school in the state of Connecticut. So is that not our primary purpose? And so people ask me these questions, well, okay, can we live without instructional coaches? It's a values choice. We can. We can also choose to be at number 168. But that's not what this community wants, right? We want high property values. We want great schools. We want our kids, I'll speak only for myself. I want my kids to go to the best colleges they can go to, right? And so I'm hard pressed to sacrifice anything. So sorry for the soapbox, but I hope that at least speaks a little bit to your question.
Well, if I can talk about what our function is to represent the whole town, and part of, certainly a big part of the value of homes, which is why a lot of people are here, is because of the education system. I mean, it's clear that it's a draw. Our education product is a draw. But another product is low taxes. And so part of our role is to try and keep taxes affordable for the town. And one of the things that we do is we try to provide guidance to say, what can the town afford? And there was a quote in Good Morning Wilton, Ruth saying, guidance is just guidance, which I guess means kind of you can ignore it. So I guess my question is, what is your guidance on what the Board of Finance should do about guidance?
So, and I'm just speaking for me, there's no, the Board of Ed, we have not voted on a budget, there's no Board of Ed budget, we have Kevin's proposal. I appreciate that there was guidance given. The guidance was given based on what the Board of Finance thinks as the tax, I guess you could say, appetite of the town, given a certain set of unknown parameters. Because we still don't know what our grand list is going to come in at. We don't know where revaluation is going to fall. There's still a lot of unknowns out. So I appreciate the guidance. I also think that part of it is the Board of Ed has also year over year put forth projections. And those projections dictate what the needs of the schools are. And I think both those things walk hand in hand. And I think Kevin very clearly stated that guidance is not ignored or, not looked at. And if you look at the discussions at the Board of Education table, looking at, asking Kevin where things would come from, what would we do? We're all mindful of the tax implications of our current, of the school's current needs. But there is also a job for the Board of Education, I believe, to put forth a budget or to talk about the school's needs. What are the educational needs and the expectations of our kids and our town? And that might not always align with the Board of Finance's understanding of what they believe the town can afford from a tax perspective. And that's a conversation that then moves to the town and moves its way, I think, through these discussions and through a process. And so that's my own personal perspective of it, which is, the understanding the quote at the table. I think it would be a disservice to our town if the Board of Education did not holistically look at a proposal from the superintendent, from the experts that we hired to do this job, and to look at it and say, you're telling me this is what it takes to do what we're doing, and to do it in a way that gets the results that we've all come to know and enjoy and come here for. So I don't, and we can agree to disagree. I don't necessarily think that low taxes is a product that people come to this town to buy, the same way that they, the schools are. But that's my own, my own personal opinion on that. And so when I think about it, I think to myself, well, we have this guidance, we have this understanding. There's still a lot of unknowns. And right now, I feel that my job as a member of the Board of Education is to say, this is where I think that it's these packages that make this package of goods and services that make up our budget are the baseline, the base of what we need to do to deliver what we want and value in our education system. And we're working on it. You have questions, we have questions.
So you're right, we don't have all of the numbers yet. But we do kind of have some idea where they're gonna go. And we are kind of approaching a perfect financial storm here in the town. We have several factors. Moody's is changing its rating, so for us to keep our AAA rating, we have to make some changes in our budget. We have we're up to 180 million in maintenance expenses that we have, which is a significant expense. Now, we think about 30 million of that will be covered by the state, but that still leaves 150. But then Ambler Farm came in and said they want 2.2. So now we're up to 152. So the number keeps growing on a daily basis of what we need to spend. And we can cover some of that, but not all, and not even most of it. So there will be an expense that we haven't had. We've underspent over the last 10, 15 years on building maintenance. And if you walk through the town hall, you can see that it needs a paint job in the worst way. We are also seeing that, if the Board of Ed, and then the reval, we don't have the numbers on the revaluation, but it's pretty clear right now from anecdotal evidence that home values are gonna go up, have gone up pretty significantly. Commercial real estate will not go up as much. And so that means that even if the town didn't spend a penny more last year to this year. Individual homeowners will see a significant increase, a few percentage points, in their property taxes to cover the discrepancy from residential real estate to commercial real estate. So we are looking at a starting point. The starting point isn't zero. The starting point is some number higher than zero in terms of people's property taxes. And so when you add all of those up, the potential is there that, and if the Board of Ed spends over what we've anticipated, the potential is there that people will see double-digit tax increases in their property taxes. A significant portion of, depending on where you guys end up on your part of the budget. And this year is the Moody's, the Revale, the Board of Ed spending. As we go into future years, the Board of Ed spending will still be there and increases, but then the building maintenance kicks in. So over the next few years, we could see some extraordinarily high property tax increases. And that's something you need to be aware of. And whether we get to the point where the town
Why does the Board of Ed need to be aware? I think we're all aware of that, Rudy.
Well, I think it's because that's why we're trying to keep costs
All right, I'll jump in. So first and foremost, we've only gone through one
Question
question
one.
out of 29. So we should get back to that, but just to address what's been said. So the role of the Board of Finance is to kind of marry everything that we're hearing right now. So I think the Board of Education, or the administrators, the Board of Ed still needs to vote and adopt this. You guys put forward a budget, you'll review it. What Rudy articulated, I know what he articulated was that these are all the different things that are going on within our minds right now. Because ultimately, everybody here either has children in the school, had children in the school, or will have children in the school, and went to these schools. We were joking before, Mrs. Ely taught my brother. Mrs. Coleman had my brother in 2nd grade. So this is very real for us. But on top of all that, we're trying to think in our heads. So typically we spend, 40 minutes on one question? Typically I would have jumped in and tried to redirect us back to this. The reason why I didn't is I really wanted all of us on this side of the table, and everyone out there too, I'm speaking directly to our residents. I really want us to understand what the trade-offs are, right? Because who knows what the Board of Finance decides. We did put out a 4% mill rate guidance, which is the highest. If that is what passes, it'll be the highest in years. We put that out there. But if that ultimately is what we go back to, there will be really hard decisions made. And those are decisions made by the Board of Ed, and they're really hard decisions. And so we're trying to understand exactly kind of what goes into it. On the other side, and again, this gets to what Rudy was saying, and Stuart was saying, 38% of the town has kids in the school, 62% does not. And so that's not to say that we don't value the schools. I don't have kids in the schools. I certainly value them. But that's trying just to understand what goes into it. So with that, that's a conversation for the Board of Finance. No one was suggesting that you guys don't understand that. You are all residents of this community, either as teachers, as educators, or directly living here with 5 children in the school. But
Consumer and a taxpayer.
Consumer and a taxpayer. So with that, unless there's more questions on trade-offs, maybe we get to question number 2.
Yeah, and so, we'll we ought to be done by 3 or 4. So the next question is a sunnier question. And I think, again, process-wise, the spirit of the question is, where else, in terms of non-labor, have we looked recently or looked in the past to try to achieve savings? And I didn't give you an exhaustive list, but to paint a picture that this is truly part of the process annually. The first, at the top of page 2, I just included some courses from the high school that we have taken out of the course catalog. And so we look at course subscription very closely at the high school, and when courses dip below a certain number, we don't run them, and the high school administrators have come up with all kinds of creative ways of running courses and dual enrolling courses so kids can take the courses they need. But what happens here is we take certain courses out. We also annually propose new courses because we are trying to innovate and evolve our total curriculum at the high school. And so sometimes the old courses will be replaced by new courses, and we're able to do that in an FTE neutral manner. And, that's what we're anticipating going forward. But that's, a big part of our process. This wasn't driven by cost containment, but last year, you were here, some of you anyway, the night we were still deliberating about the Middlebrook schedule, and so you got to hear some feedback from some of our parents about that. But we had some other schedule objectives we wanted to achieve. Primarily, we wanted to honor the curriculum recommendations to have 60 minutes of math and an integrated 60-minute ELA course. So we were able to achieve that in the schedule, and one of the byproducts of that is we were able to reduce our ELA staff by half. So that's certainly a budget savings, or at least absorbing other FTE that were coming off some of the grants that were expiring. Small but important nonetheless. We looked at our cartage vendor, and so we made a change to Oak Ridge. We came in line with the town. That picked up a few thousand in savings. We're in a process now of looking at our general supply vendor and seeing if we can't make some different procurement changes in order to achieve some savings there. So that's being scrutinized as we speak. Jose Figueroa, who's here with us tonight, has been engaged in conversations with the company Cintas, which supplies custodial supplies, cleaning supplies, among many other services. We're switching from Hilliard to Cintas in this coming budget year, which will enable us to keep all of those custodial supplies flat funded. In their initial presentation to Jose, they also named a series of other opportunities that they can provide in terms of security system monitoring. They do all kinds of things, and so we're looking at the opportunity to roll some of these things into a single contract, which might also yield savings. I would expect we would have some clarity on what that's going to do by the end of this month. I was going back and looking through some old budgets, and again, I want to highlight for this group and for, everybody else, we look at every single line. I went back and looked at the money we spent back in 2015-16 on training and conferences. That was, at the time, $288,000. That line has come down to $165 in this proposed budget. So we have done some serious squeezing over the years. Some other areas, I think you've heard plenty about this concept of cost avoidance. And so programs like Genesis, which is our alternative high school program that operates out of Trackside. Community Steps is our special ed program that serves students who are age 18 to 22. If those programs didn't exist, those kids would be in outplacement sites. And the cost of that outplacement site, tuition can range anywhere from $70,000 to $250,000 plus transportation. So I did just a kind of a simple comparison. The per pupil at Genesis right now is $39,000. That's inclusive of transportation. Community Steps is $59,000. That's inclusive of transportation. So that's less than half of what we'd be spending if we had to outplace these kids. So while it's not a true savings, it is absolutely cost avoidance. In recent years, we've streamlined the classroom technology. There was a point in time when every teacher had a laptop and a desktop and a projector and a screen and a smart board. And so we have been slowly streamlining over the years their technology materials. And so, we're figuring we've saved probably about $850 per teacher as we've rolled out some of the old equipment and rolled in some of the new. A year ago, we renewed a copier contract that's centralized printing, and will save over $300,000 the course of that contract. One of the smartest things we did a couple of years ago was hire an electrician. And so prior to having an electrician on staff, all of that work was contracted out at a premium. And so our electrician works for us. He makes, on or around $100,000 in salary, but saves us, probably 3 or 4 times that in what we avoid in having to pay a contractor service to do all the wiring work that he does every single day.
I think that also goes to the HVAC
technician that we're training to then have on staff.
Yeah, that, and actually, that's an interesting, kind of opposite point. We had a gentleman that worked for us for 25 years and maintained our HVAC system as an employee. There's just a shortage, so he retired a couple of years ago, and we have not been able to find somebody to replace him. So we are beholden to vendors to provide contracted services. Given the age and the end-of-life status of all of those pieces, we pay a premium in trying to keep our systems running. So one of our current maintenance men, we're sending back to school to get his HVAC license. It'll be a 2-year process. We're happy to pay it because between the cost of school and what we'll save when he's ready to go, will more than make up for, the difference in what we're paying in those contracts. And then just, things that you're already aware of. We've had a great arrangement with the town, sharing the CFO and sharing a facilities director, which, across the town and the board, between the two saves $180, $190 a year, which is, a great investment and a great cooperative arrangement. And then just some other small things. We introduced solar here a while ago, and so we pick up savings there. We introduced natural gas probably 8 or 9 years ago, and we pick up savings there. And so we continue to, look through all of those pieces. But we've done quite a bit over the years to try to drive down some of those fixed costs. Happy to comment on any one of those, or we can kind of move it along here.
I just have a question on the courses dropped.
Yeah.
So like when I see, I don't know, like some of the math classes, geometry or physical science, is there like an alternative offered, or?
These are level 1 courses, so it's the level, I think, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, so does that mean a freshman is left behind?
So level 1 would, traditionally level 1 is like the lowest track.
Okay.
And so what we're trying to do also is detrack at the lowest level. There's quite a body of research that says kids who are in this lowest level track never get out and never experience the real breadth or density of the curriculum some of their peers in the upper tracks do. So by eliminating some of the level 1 track, we move kids into the college prep track, and so they're receiving a more rigorous curriculum.
Okay.
So there's another motive for some of those courses. Some of the, I'll just kind of scanning through these. Themes and literature is an elective, principles of engineering is an elective, and they've been undersubscribed. We have another engineering course that kids like, 2 others that kids like and take, so.
Okay, thank you.
Some of these will probably be re-offered just to test. There were questions based on some of Heather's questions last week, and so there's a separate document where we track Board of Ed questions. And so I'm not going to go into this in detail. You can read it. There's a lot of narrative here. But, when we're looking at, different positions, we've done some consolidating in the past. But I would say at this point, when I think about our current roles, I would not be advocating to add different responsibilities to our current instructional coaches or to some of our instructional leaders. They have full-time jobs and full plates already. And so to me, it doesn't make sense to try to collapse or combine those responsibilities. Particularly with the instructional coach piece, I'll just go back and say if our primary purpose is high academic attainment, we should be supporting our staff with as much professional support as we possibly can. We get a lot of bang for our buck with instructional coaches, in my opinion. Again, we can, people can debate that, but, that's kind of where I am. Stuart asked a question, can we pare back a little bit? And the answer is, of course we could, and at what cost? And so that's something, as we consider that, I know, and Kathy Kuhn spoke at length during the board workshop about the loss of the one instructional coach at Miller Driscoll. We're always also combating curriculum change and, new materials and things like that. So, we just never feel like we get to a point where people are like, I got it. So there's always a trade-off. Some of it's non-monetary. There was a question about the projection. So we just included, I don't know if some of you, I'm sure, have seen them. So you have in the materials we provided you today, the SLAM analysis. I think it's really strong. And so, in addition to just breaking out very granularly the enrollment distribution and the low, medium, high projections, there was also some analysis of the potential housing starts and what the impact could be there. So I think it's very good reading. I will just share with the Board of Finance members, one of the differences that we're monitoring for next year, it will result because of a change in the law. So the state of Connecticut changed the kindergarten start age. So now September 1 is the cutoff. It used to be December 1. And so when we were working with the SLAM folks, they built in a variance across pre-K and K. So I think in the projection, they actually overinflated the pre-K numbers. They listed it at 93. We don't have capacity to have 93 preschoolers. But I'm also anticipating that some of those kids will land in our kindergarten class. So between the pre-K and the kindergarten cohort, I'm very comfortable with the total number, knowing that some that SLAM included in the pre-K number will be sitting in our kindergarten classes, because we've made the decision locally to allow, any of those families who are eligible but don't meet the age cutoff to enroll in kindergarten. Kathy and her team have been interviewing families, pretty steadily for the last month or so. And so, we'll continue to watch the projection, but I don't have a worry about that. Everything else outside of that I think is pretty solid, and, generally speaking, SLAM's on the money. They do a pretty good job. The other areas that we continue to watch, we've seen an inversion in trend here in recent years. When we look at cohorts moving from 8th to 9th grade, we used to see a decline annually because kids were out for private school. We're just not seeing that in the numbers in the last 2 years. And so, again, it's a trend worth observing. We're hanging on, across all of the high school cohort, we're hanging on to more kids. And so, that's good news for us, but, it's an early trend and we need to continue to watch.
It's a general question, just in thought process. Stuart alluded to this before. And I see some friendly faces. I've been speaking to the PTAs, and one question I got asked at one of the other meetings was how the district thinks about, not the right words, but correlating enrollment with staffing ratios. And I honestly, I wasn't sure the answer, so I would just pass it to you.
Yeah, I don't, so if you were just take the entire staff and run it against the entire student body, I don't know that would produce any meaning. And I say that because our staff does so many different things. So, I think where it's more useful is when you look at certified staff, against classroom size populations. And, I think, Stuart, again, it was you that asked a question about class size, and, it provided a pretty lengthy answer that we can get into in a minute. But when you're talking about all staff, I just don't know that you can make sense of it because the roles are so different, right? Thank you. So there was a question about the defined contribution increases. You can see the answer there. Back in 2011, the district implemented a 401A defined contribution plan, moving away from the defined benefit plan. And so currently there's somewhere between 150, 120 employees on this plan out of the 190 that are eligible. As our more senior staff who are in the defined benefit plan roll off, they'll be, the new staff members will be absorbed by the defined contribution plan.
And that's a 7%. Is that correct?
I'd have to go back and look at the number. I just don't have it in front of me. So you'll see an evening out over time. Another question about salaries and just the distribution of the, total percentage. So employees hired in 23-24 represented 116,000. In terms of percentage breakdown across the salary line, the administrator group represented 7.69%. The teachers group was 73.4. Our UPSU group was 11.3. So those are the secretaries and paras. Custodians were a hair over 5%. Subs were 1.5. And then, all of the other folks we have, cafeteria aides, tutors, all of the people who are less than full-time, are less than a point there in the total salary pie.
I want to make sure I understand the question. So my question was really You have attrition, based upon the survey, was 17 people, unless those were just teachers,
Certified staff. in that.
certified staff.
Yeah.
But that can add up to $116,000, so.
Mary Ann answered this question, so I'd have to find out what she's referring to
Yeah,
there.
so what I was really referring to is, so if you started the year with 560 some odd employees.
Yes.
And if you broke them down between certified staff and others, you lost 17 certified staff and you replaced them in kind.
Yep.
At some level. I was just trying to figure out of continuing staff, of people who were here in, the beginning of last year, or how many are here this year, and how much has that amount gone up. I was trying to correlate back to the 4% increase and also adjusting it for
Sure.
Attrition and new hiring. So the theory that someone else who was on the Board of Finance years ago once told me was that you have the step increases, you have the you have the contractual increase, less an attrition factor. And I was trying to figure out
Understood.
what that
The attrition
math
factor.
was.
Yeah, and then the other factor, we bake into the budget every year,
Yeah.
$400,000 offset, assuming that, our senior staff that retire will be
Yeah.
replaced by less expensive staff, so you'd have to factor that into the number too.
Yeah,
If you
but the
give us a
116
day-
is not the answer, but if you
Yeah,
can get
I
back
can
to us
give
on
you the
that,
exact
yeah.
answer, because we know exactly who's
Yeah.
where and how much they
Yeah, of
cost, and
course.
so it's all baked into the tag.
Yeah.
All right, I understand what you're asking.
And then on this question, as you answer that, the question, I had asked a question about what the percent of the employees fall in each bucket, because and by buckets, custodians, it's teachers, 'cause each of them have different union wage increases. And just the answer I'm trying to figure out is what is the blended salary increase? The back of the envelope math I just did, which is probably wrong because I did it quickly, was 3.5 to 3.6%, which is less than the 4%. So anyway, that's the math that we're trying to do, just to figure out how much is that growing versus.
Yes.
Got it.
Those contracts came in at lower rates than the professional, than the certified.
The
Yeah.
WA was the highest.
Which was closer to the town, the Board of Selectmen's town increases, but theirs were actually lower. based-
Yeah, I want to say the custodians were like 2 3/4, paras a little higher. The question about the preschool program. So actually, so I think this was also your question, so, and I think you were.
Number 8 or.
Yeah, you're looking at
grade wrong.
staffing again.
Yeah, and let me just explain the question. So, I didn't want to get too much into generalities, but this does go far back. But I think part of the confusion perhaps, out there in the town sometimes is that people don't realize that some of the lower increases over the years, I think from the Board of Finance perspective, has been from the perspective of our student enrollment has been dropping. And since 2008, that student enrollment, if you exclude pre-K, it's gone down from 2008 till this past year by 17%. If you include pre-K, the pre-K has increased, so it's up 15%. So, that's something that people don't recognize. And I know, and Ruth and I have had this conversation about, I always tend to try to really look at the data associated with EdSite and the state of Connecticut in terms of the per student spending. And I realize that's not the only data, but it's another indicator. And I think if you look at just the raw increases in total, it's wrong. And I think if you just look at the per student data, it's not the right way to look at it. But you have to look at those in aggregate. But my question was really about staffing in total. So if you go all those years back, the staffing, and I know a lot of things have changed, and I think this might be educational for all of us, but the staffing level, 570, 580 total staff is about what it was back then when the number of students was, call it 15% higher, and 17% higher if you look at, if you exclude pre-K, because pre-K is considered a part-time program. So, you know, maybe for the education, I know that you've talked in the past about the fact that the special ed, there are greater requirements in terms of coverage, but maybe if you could just help out in general.
Yeah, and so, you know, we'll send to you, Lucille is pulling those tonight, and so
Yeah.
we just need to reconcile numbers and make sure that the sources are all accurate. And what I mean by that is, you know, in our record keeping, sometimes we'll look at staff that's just in the budget, and we'll have that on, you know, in a place, and then you won't factor in staff that are funded by any grants that we get. And so I just want to make sure we're looking at apples to apples numbers, but in a look I did tonight, you're absolutely right. So back in like 2005 or so, we were sitting 570, 575, and then we hit an increase. I think we peaked in 2011-ish with 611 or so staff. That was the high watermark. And then it's been coming down, and we've been in that, you know, 568 was the low since I've been here, and, you know, hovering around 570 in general. So here, what's changed in all of those years? So, you know, number one, you know, and I'm just going to go kind of big picture here. So the curriculum demands are completely different. So with the introduction of Common Core state standards back in 2010, and, you know, Wilton was, you know, just kind of a beat behind the 8 ball and getting them implemented. So, you know, we really didn't have, across the board, good core standards in place till, you know, 2014, 2015. So that completely changed the game. And, you know, the way we used to talk about it when they were first being rolled out was what you were taught in 2nd grade is now kindergarten content. And so you cannot understate the significance of the curriculum change. So that's kind of one. Also, for our staff, with the onset of No Child Left Behind and the introduction of the standards era and the accountability era, we also had new demands around teacher evaluation, right? And then we also had the introduction of state assessments annually in every grade, beginning in 3rd grade through 8th grade, and then once in the high school. That was a result of No Child Left Behind. Connecticut still maintains that. So the accountability exams completely changed the game for staff. That also led us to focusing.
Because you talked about these other, in what way did accountability change staffing, and in what way did?
So,
like you said, kindergarten, what they taught in 2nd grade, they teach in
right.
kindergarten. How does that
Under,
affect
so under No Child Left Behind, right, that was kind of the advent. The expectation was that every single kid, 100% of kids, you know, and at that time it was by 2014, would hit proficiency, would be proficient in reading, proficient in math, and there was a whole set of sanctions if you didn't. And so across all districts, what that did was, you know, help districts to really focus on kids that were underperforming. And so it gave rise to more special education services for kids who had, you know, true learning disabilities. And it gave rise to an increase in intervention services. You know, so while there was always some type of intervention in place to support struggling readers, struggling mathematicians, what have you, the change in the laws and the policy at that time really focused on making sure all kids were up to snuff. And there's a whole human infrastructure behind that. That human infrastructure is in place today. And, you know, in fact, we've strengthened it because, again, as Wilton, it's our commitment to make sure every kid can meet and exceed his or her potential. So it had staffing implications. That's really the bottom line. We brought in more staff to bolster the curricular program. I mentioned before, you know, that this idea of complexity and that the composition of, you know, kids in our classrooms have changed. So again, you know, Wilton's not different than many other communities. Kids are coming to school with more outside stressors, right? If you, again, look back over 20 years, family compositions have changed. Families have broken down. There aren't the same kind of, you know, common social supports in place that used to be. And so the school has become the place where a lot of kids have many of their needs that might have been addressed in a different environment addressed. And so over time, we've had added more staff to support the mental health and the social and emotional health of kids. We've developed entire curricula, all in service to academic attainment, but that's not a feature that was in place writ large, you know, even 20 years ago.
So what does that represent today? I mean, is it Are those special, is it 10% of the staff?
Yeah, you'd have to go back. I don't have numbers in my head to tell you categorically what they are. I'd have to go back and look at them.
Just
But I can
approximate.
tell you, I can say for certain, proportionally, it's grown. The vast majority of our staff today remains, classroom teachers, and so across the board. But they are supported by ancillary staff, and so they might be interventionists. We have a whole cadre of paraprofessionals, right? So these are non-certified folks who are, oftentimes we have kids in our classrooms who, really struggle with their emotional regulation. So they need another adult, present just to help them stay on task and manage and be safe in the environment so they can be educated alongside their peers. Because what we don't want to have is reams of kids being educated outside of our school system. So, give me a day and I can get you proportions. But, I can say very surely that those numbers have grown over time.
So are the number of classes, let me see if I can ask this better. So are the number of if you added up the number of kindergarten, first grade, second grade.
Sections.
Classes, are they about the same as they were 10, 15 years ago? And all of the add-ons are these other people you're talking about?
Yeah, so you'd have to go back and so reasonably, if you look back in time and you look at average class size, right? Wilton's maintained a class size policy for many years, and we're in the range of 18 to 24, 25, K-8. That hasn't changed. There's been some slight variance over the years, but it's been pretty stable. So to the extent that the population has grown to add a section or reduce a section or decrease or reduce a section, that's what we've done. But generally speaking, we've maintained those class sizes. And then, to your question, where it's changed, we've certainly increased special education staff. We have certainly increased mental health staff. And then we, in the time that I've been here, have made other programmatic investments. And so we were talking about instructional coaching. That's a programmatic investment that we've made in my time here because we support the professional development of teachers. We've added interventionists because we want to make sure that all kids are meeting the standards. It's a small population, but we've invested in our library learning commons staff. And so, these people provide instruction to kids in not only all the traditional library services, but a lot of the innovative STEM work that we're doing, particularly at the primary grades, occurs through the library learning commons. So we've chosen to invest in those programs as well. So it's a values decision that we've made.
I think also it's a fair point that, at least since I've been on the board, and I was first elected and 4 months later, the world shut down for COVID. So I've, had an interesting trajectory. But we also have been looking at preserving our class sizes at the lower end of that range, given all the increased stressors and parameters that kids are now bringing into the building. And also the increased expectation and the leveling up of standards. So a teacher needs to be able to accomplish more in the classroom with their kids, given the same, parameters of the 6 hours and 20 minutes that they have them for the day.
Does that help?
Thank you.
Yeah, school today is not like when you were in school or when I was in school. It's a very different place.
But you should come see it because it's really extraordinary.
Right. Question about whether or not the leasing of technology is in this currently proposed budget. It's not. So pending approval from the Board of Selectmen, we would be able to reduce the bottom line by $200,000. There was a clarifying question about clubs and about the co-curricular activities. Those are clubs and activities. Question about the transportation. So we used a company earlier this year to just run an analysis of our operations. Under the law, we're required to have a seat on the bus for every kid that comes to our public schools. We know that ridership is low. It varies across run, whether it's the Cider Mill run or the high school, middle school run. But in the analysis, we saw that we may have some opportunities. And so the opportunity that we're exploring now that I named a little bit ago is that if we can collapse some runs, we can potentially take a couple buses out of service, which would figure about $95,000 per bus. If we're able to do that, then there's $190,000 that we could also take off per bus.
For the year.
It'd be great if it was per month.
I know.
Then it would be, we wouldn't even
Right.
need to have this conversation.
Yeah, so per bus. And so the detail is there for you. There was a question about, whether
So
there's a.
that number just feels low, because, again, the premise for me was when I, long ago, I used to drive to Stanford every day, and I used to be in New Canaan, and it looked like there were way more kids in the buses than there are here. And again, this is just, anecdotal, but it just seems that based upon reading that study, that we could go significantly beyond the 20, I think it was 20% K through 8, and something like 28% in the high school. It's, still extraordinary low penetration rates for ridership on the buses. And the other part of the question was, and I'm sure I know nothing about this, but I thought I'd float the question, why isn't the busing done by geography instead of by grade level? And I realized when the timing was changed for the earlier grades to start at 7 in the morning, that there was an uproar. And I know I don't know anything about this, and maybe I shouldn't waste everyone's time, but it just seems that because of the buses drive so much of that, because I remember reading that perhaps there's some other way to think about it by geography. I mean, can you have children of all grades sitting on the same bus, and why couldn't you go to an expected rate of 80% instead of 20%?
Sure. I would just, take you back to, your days when you were a father of a young child, and do you want your 5-year-old child sitting on a bus with a 13-year-old? All of our 13-year-olds are lovely, but they have different kinds of conversations.
Well, we could talk about my 5-year-old too.
So here's just, two things. I think, one, just big picture, Wilton was, and remains, on the cutting edge. It was the League of Women Voters back in, 2002, 2003 that showed up in Dave Clune's office with a sleep study and said, what are you doing to our teenagers? Dead on, of all of the research that's out there, this body of research on sleep for adolescents is probably some of the most irrefutable. And so, what a gift that, this school system and this town gave to its high school and middle school kids by shifting the start time to 8:20. The trade-off, obviously, was you move Cider Mill to the front. So I think, I would say we do bus by geography, because even within the 3 through 5 grade band, those buses aren't careening all over town. They're, cordoned off to parts of town. I don't see benefit, and I don't see benefit to collapsing runs. In fact, I think, if anything, if we were to, you can read the answers here, but if we were to eliminate the tiers, we would create more problems. I just think about, really kind of silly low-level things like traffic on campus. It's hard enough to get on and off School Road with the one school, filling and emptying, and then, think about what happens here when the high school and middle school does. So, small things like that would be problematic. But I think some of the bigger concerns would have, as part of our economizing over the years, we have staff that we share across schools. And so the reason we're able to do that is because the schools operate on different time schedules. And so, to create a common bell schedule, I don't think would yield any benefit.
How about just on the base question of, the higher penetration as a focus, even leaving the current structure alone, notwithstanding that the technology has gotten so much better, and maybe 5 years from now, we may have autonomous buses, and presumably there'll be more availability to things, to ways to get children from point A to point B.
Sure.
With technology watching over them, and
Yeah, and I think, just on the point, so this analysis is based on ridership, right? And so one of the recommendations that was made as we were doing this, and, we haven't done it yet, but we will, is go survey your folks, and, no blood and stone commitment to buy, but, if you don't have plans to ever use the bus, let us know. And then we'll hold those numbers up to what the ridership is and see how they reconcile. And there may be opportunity for, more than 2 buses. We just have to, we have to ask those questions. I think, like everything else, it's nuanced too, because we also have to think about, our emergency responses and worst-case scenarios, and if we need to get kids out of schools and we've taken buses out of service, what's our capacity like to be able to do that, and what's the time implication? We included in the answer for you too, just some other pieces of information we use when we're trying to make the
Are
calculus.
there any other towns around here that have a potentially very different view on this subject?
The only one I can speak to is Darien. They run an opt-in, opt-out program, so they survey their families annually. It hasn't changed the number of buses they have in service, and, when I was talking to the superintendent about it earlier this year, he said getting response rates from families was really hard, and so I just thought, all right, it's great information, but I would ask the question a little differently, just to, again, I don't want to create another bureaucratic structure for families to make it hard to ride a bus if they need to. So we just have to consider all those factors, but they're the only one that I'm aware of that really looks at their ridership and tries to make some decisions about it.
And they're also the ones who charge a whole lot more for the students who ski and play hockey.
Yes, correct. They have a different, but they don't charge for
For
anything
anything
else.
else?
They don't charge for anything.
No. Yeah, skiing, hockey, and sailing.
Yes. And it's just a percentage of the least money, I believe.
Yeah.
So, moving right along, there was I'll leave you to read it, and I put in your materials the briefing I gave to the board last year about the request to switch from Anthem to Cigna, and so you can read in clear detail the savings we'll achieve in administrative costs over 3 years. We're tracking claims rates as we do, and so we'll see if that percentage increase is able to shift at all in this current year, and I won't even talk about what next year could look like. There was a question about fuel, so that we contract with the town on that to try to get a group rate. And then question 14, just some questions about drivers of various lines, large lines in the budget. And so employee benefits, the largest driver there is obviously the medical. When you look at the equipment line, that's up, and there's a range of reasons that's up. The technology is folded within that, and so again, if we were able to purchase differently, that line would come down. Within there's facilities needs, and then the music department has grown in the request a bit this year. They've launched a competitive marching band, and so folded within the request is a dollar amount to purchase new uniforms. We're also trying to be better at honoring our music equipment replacement schedule, which, like a lot of other things, when it comes to trying to shave a dollar here, a dollar there, that's a schedule that we've gotten off of to try to, in the near term, save some dollars.
Sorry, on this line item specifically.
Yep.
And this is a super nuanced question, I appreciate you going into it. What is the training and conferences represent new over last year? And same with the out-of-district tuition?
So the dollar to dollar, is that what you're asking?
Not necessarily the dollar, but like just what conceptually is being done now that we're paying for that we weren't doing last year? So not just the dollar amount, but the new
Like,
item.
what is the new item?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so again, remember, this rolls across every department we have, and so, I'd have to go and see
We can
what
follow- we
the
can follow
actual
on it.
new is. But, in general, what we'll send, for example, there's a state conference for all world language educators. We've limited the number of staff, or eliminated that entirely in previous years. So there's an add back, so we can add a few more staff to that. There's a similar type of conference for, physical educators. We took out of the contract entirely, we had been working pretty closely with Teachers College to support the literacy program. That's gone entirely. And so, now we're looking for other ways to support our, the reading program. New here, we are also introducing a new math curriculum that we've been rolling into for the last several years. So there's additional training and support, for illustrative mathematics. The list would go on and on.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Out-of-district tuition is up, that's, primarily driven by the contracted increases we see in these places. We, factor in, we look at our actuals and anticipate as best we can, but we also factor in like one extra. And this is the line, we've talked about this lots of times in the past. This is the single most vulnerable line in the budget. One kid can blow it up. Dues and membership, it's a small dollar amount, but, those are really just, subscription increases. Contracted services, there's a range of contracts in that line. So the transportation contracts are there. Some of the new ads include some support for a leadership program we just launched at the high school in the Safe School Climate program. So it's a peer leadership program. Our athletic director has proposed engaging in a relationship with Sacred Heart University to bring in physical trainer interns. So they run a physical training certification program. We invested a lot of money in bringing our physical training center at the high school up to speed in the last 2 years. One of the challenges right now is we don't have a way to staff it, so all kids that would want to use it, whether before school, after school, during their lunch break, whatever, can use it. And so we're trying to build some capacity. This is a cost-effective way to do that, but that's a $20,000, that's a new request that didn't exist prior to this year. Property services, again, I think it's just, general increases across the various contracts we run. So the rental fees we have, that's for trackside. We pay, quite a lot in ice time up in Ridgefield for our boys and girls hockey team. We pay for rental time for a diving tank in New Canaan for our diving team, and then the access to Mount Southington for our ski team.
And just on the general question, on the building repairs line, that does not include items in
No.
the needs assessment report.
No, so a couple of you asked that, and I did not include any of those items. And the reason is, it's, I maintain that, the three boards really need to kind of work on this and develop a plan. And so, the costs of that, primarily I think are going to live with the Board of Selectmen, whether they choose to bond or, create some other funding mechanism to respond to that. But I think, there's got to be a plan. Matt, I think you asked the question about, do I have a view on the total proposal? And so I have a few. And so, just, again, and you've all, I think, walked through the schools, and so that generally speaking, our custodial staff and our maintenance crew do a very good job maintaining the facilities. But the facilities are aging, and so we have roofing and HVAC concerns that you've heard lots about. They need to be addressed. Those are tier 1 priorities at Middlebrook and Cider Mill. That has to be done in the next couple of years. There are other things that we can certainly defer, but I think, the longer we wait, then we deal with escalation. So, I'm
And
really...
emergency repairs.
We saw some of that this year, right? With the, I think I still need to send you, the request for $163,000 in charter authority to help address the money we didn't budget to deal with all the mold mitigation at those 2 schools and the flooring replacement.
So how much, that was actually one of the questions I think that I asked.
Yeah.
How much money was allocated for kind of emergency repairs?
Yeah, you'd have to go into the budget and look at the general maintenance line. It's there. We always have some because we understand that we have some planned repairs, and we know that, coils are going to break and things are going to go wrong, and so there's a small line. It wasn't $163,000, in addition to everything else that we have to maintain.
Okay, and in the big budget maintenance report, is that just fixing existing things? Or
Yes.
there's no changing rooms, because this room would be better if it's a little bigger, and that kind of stuff?
No, I mean, there's nothing of substance. You know, Jose and his team, you know, Jose works, you know, with all of the principals to prioritize, you know, needs. Some things we know, and again, some things we don't. And so he uses, you know, past history to try to judge and manage that account. But there's nothing new there. So we'll do small things. You know, I think and folded into that line, we have been trying to replace bathroom partitions, you know, because again, they're just aging. And so there's money, you know, we know that we might need to do 30 of them, but we've got money for 2 of them. And just trying to chip away at things like that. So those are the kinds of things you would see on that line.
Do you have an opinion of what the agreement should be between you and the Board of Selectmen in terms of, is it sort of, you get everything inside the, I think that's kind of what you're
Yeah,
saying before, right?
so-
Everything inside the walls is yours?
Yeah, so in terms of maintaining, right, I think, you know, I don't know that there's a perfect analogy here, but simply, you know, I would think that the Board of Education is a renter. And so what's the obligation of a renter, right? And maybe we're a little bit more than a renter. So, you know, we certainly clean, we do the day-to-day maintenance, we do the ongoing maintenance of all of the HVAC equipment. But at the end of the day, if the HVAC equipment all needs to be replaced, why would that be in a Board of Education operating budget and not in a town facilities budget? Or in a shared facilities budget?
Right. I'm thinking more like, if this room needs to be repainted.
Yeah, we would do that. I think that would be
That would
ours.
be yours?
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Why not? Yeah. But I think you're talking, you know, major projects, you know, floor replacement,
I think one,
relamping.
one idea I heard was, if it can be bonded, then it should be with the Board of Selectmen.
I don't know that that's, well, the Board of Ed doesn't have bonding authority, so
Yeah,
that's
that'd be-
easy.
Well,
was
that's what
bonded,
I'm saying,
that'd be
if it
separate.
can be bonded, then, or funded, then they,
Yeah, and Rudy, I don't know why it matters, right? At the end of the day, it's, you know, you can separate out Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed, but, you know, it's all coming out of taxpayer pockets for the most part at the end of the day.
Right.
So how it gets there, I think is a less important question. You know, and when you think about like, why would you know, if our primary purpose is to educate our kids, and I've got facilities, things I need to do, and I'm constrained, then, you know, I've got to reallocate resources away from kids to deal with the building stuff. And I don't know, I just don't know that
yeah, I
that's.
don't have an opinion either way, I just wanted to know
Okay.
what your opinion was, more than, I don't know that there is a right answer.
There's not. And that's, I think, all the more reason to say the boards need to come together and sooner rather than later. And, you know, I haven't seen the town facilities report, but, right, there's more than just the schools that need to be addressed in the near term here.
And we'll be, Matt Knickerbocker, the town administrator, will be talking to us about this on Tuesday.
Yeah. There was a question about the cost of reading materials. So again, not to belabor the point, there was a law, the right to read law was passed in 2021 here in the state of Connecticut. The State Department of Education's implementation of that law has stipulated that all districts select one of a couple of handfuls of prescribed programs. We have major philosophical and ethical concerns about the implementation of that law, and so we're engaged in a process to try to avoid having to respond to the State Department's dictate. But should we have to comply, then we will have to replace all of our reading materials K to 3. The cost ranges, you know, we're collecting estimates now, and depending on the program, anywhere from $200,000 to $850,000. So we did not budget for any of these because we're going through a curriculum review process. And, you know, again, just speaking, you know, on behalf of the Wilton Public Schools, I'm not sure what it would take to get us to really fall in line with bad policy, knowing that we have very good results with the programs we're using and we get better every year. But that's, you know, a conversation for a different day. As a budget threat looking forward, this could be a major threat to our budget in, you know, fiscal '26 and beyond.
So right now, this isn't,
No,
is that what I'm reading? Okay, right now it's not an issue.
correct.
But Wilton's not the only school system that's having.
Oh, no, there's, you know, 85 of us. So there was a question about the open choice program. The information is there. The Board of Education voted last year to participate in the program. They voted to have as many as 5 kids beginning this current year. We currently have 4. 3 are in kindergarten, 1's in first grade. At this point, I do not have a recommendation prepared for the Board of Ed about the next year. We're just beginning kindergarten registration. Again, big picture philosophically, my pitch to the board on this last year was if we were going to engage in this program and take students in, we should take them in at the very earliest grades and that way have them so they get the full benefit of our complete education program so we can really maximize the opportunity, the outcome with them. So I wouldn't ever be recommending that we take kids in middle school or high school, even, in beyond Miller Driscoll.
When do you have to tell, I guess it's Norwalk?
Not till May.
But there's no additional cost within this budget for?
No, there's not.
And is there a minimum? Do we have to take
Nope.
kids?
We don't have to take kids, we don't have to participate, it's a choice.
Is there a maximum?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Question about pre-K, and so this is a pretty detailed answer. But again, just to kind of paint in broad brushstrokes. So we have an obligation under the law to educate students with disabilities beginning at age 3. And so we do that through our preschool program. There are standards and best practices about how that's done. One of the very strong recommendations in the law is that students with disabilities at this age level are educated alongside their typical developing peers. And so that's the model of our program, and we look to establish a 50% ratio. So half of any class in preschool is comprised of kids with disabilities, and the other half would be considered typically developing peers. The typically developing peers pay tuition, and so you can see in the response what the tuition that's charged and then what the revenue that's generated. Stuart or somebody had a note somewhere that I didn't exactly understand what you meant. It's a revenue generator. The program it does generate revenue for sure, and the amount of revenue has grown as we've added kids. But there's still costs that come with the program, right? So it's not like it's a break
I remember
even.
the last time, Ann was the last
Yeah.
person I asked about this, but you say that we actually still make money on it as a school. It was a net profit generator.
I don't know that was ever accurate.
Okay.
And I don't, no disrespect to Ann or anybody else or your memory about that, but I just, I think
I'm sure it's
you guys
not
are all
right, 'cause Ann
really
never-
facile with numbers.
Yeah.
So, think about the cost of the staff in that program and think about the revenue, that doesn't balance out. And it never has. So we definitely generate revenue, but it's not a break-even program.
Right, so so what's is the net cost limited to the special education, special needs population, or is this is $7,900 per child not covering the cost?
Yeah, you'd have to, if you wanted to you'd take the total cost of the classroom and then break it down by class size. So if our current class size is 12, we have, full-time teacher, we have, at least 1 paraprofessional, in some cases 2. Some classes have share a para now, and then, take the amount of tuition generated by the typical peers in that class. You can see what that doesn't account for is the related services that are provided to the kids with IEPs, right? So you'd have to factor that in. Those related services wouldn't be directed to the typical peers, but they certainly would be a cost associated with kids with IEPs. So, that's where you see the cost of the program. Question 18, question about staff-student ratios and class size. So, again, we've talked a little bit about this already. The board has a pretty clear policy that specifies class size ranges. As Ruth was describing before, we've endeavored over the last number of years to try to organize, at least at the K-5 level, classes that were at the lower end of that range. That works. And then you have a, kind of a lengthy description from me that I had also shared with the Board of Education about why I think that matters. And, I'll just call you back to some of the earlier conversation tonight about the complexion of the classrooms and the changing demographic and what teachers are experiencing. So from a classroom teacher perspective, one student absolutely matters, right? +1 and -1. And so, there are good reasons why. There was a question about clubs and activities again in the 209,000. That's the amount to fully fund that line in the next year. There was a question about how many kids participate, so you have that information here.
Sorry, not to overdo
Yep.
I don't want to spend too much time on this since it's nuanced, but $209,000, which I am very supportive of restoring the clubs. That just feels like a lot of money, just more than I would have guessed. Like, I'm just curious what's.
The stipends are contracted, so I would just refer you to the WEA contract.
So how many clubs are there?
There's many across the district. I'll send you the whole spreadsheet.
Right, 'cause if it's like the stipends, what, like $2,000?
Oh, no, they're much more. Yeah, they range. So if you go into the contract, you'll see that the activities are tiered, and so each tier pays a different stipend.
Got it.
We can get that for you.
Okay, yeah, because if it's $2,000, that's like 100 clubs, which again, I'm supportive of it, but that's.
No,
I
it's
didn't think there was
it's not
Yeah.
$2,000. We'll send you the full list.
Okay, great, thank you.
So there's a question about user fees. This is the pay to participate. So I included in your materials the memo that I presented to the Board of Education earlier this year that gives you a pretty complete description of pay to participate as it was conceived and maintained here in Wilton, as well as much comparison data that I could find. So you've got all of the DERG, right, so that's Darien, New Canaan, Ridgefield, Weston, Westport, and then I surveyed superintendents across the state. I think I had, 50 or so response, so you'll get a smattering of what, what it looks like across the state.
So why wasn't, or in the future, why wouldn't that be why wouldn't we consider increasing fees, participation fees, club participation fees, rather than get rid of it? Because, along with Matt, I absolutely agree. I wouldn't get rid of the clubs. I absolutely wouldn't get rid of sports. I mean, I just think it's integral to the education experience and healthy living. So why wouldn't you consider higher level fees? I understand this, because the cost is going to go somewhere. It's going to go to the taxpayers. It'll go to the people who use it. Some certainly can't afford it, and there should be provision for that, and there should be scholarship programs or whatever is necessary for people who can't afford to be in those. But it always struck me that, my children were skiers, and I remember when my daughter was the captain of the girls' ski team here, I always thought it was too cheap. I thought we should be paying more, because if she had a ski pass, it would be costing a lot
Sure.
more. I just,
Yeah, so, and I
and
don't,
the people are used to it. People who
Understood.
ski, people who play ice hockey, they're used to paying that.
yeah, you'll see, you'll just, again, to give you kind of complete information, in the back of that memo, you see the cost per athlete by sport. And, there won't be a surprise to anybody, because we don't maintain an ice rink in town, we pay for ice time up in Ridgefield, and so that is, far and away the cost per pupil is the highest. The least expensive might be, cross-country, right? Because kids can go and, run around Allen's Meadow, and they don't need much equipment. So I don't take a position on that, and I think, if the Board of Ed is going to contemplate, this is something we talked about in the fall, I think, to me, you have to begin with the values question of, what should a public education pay for? And then you answer that question, and then you come back to, within that, should there be an increase in fees? I think, for some, it sounds like a simple, easy, yeah, we should just raise the fees. So, it also just, when you have time, I'm assuming you're going to read everything tonight. So I think we also have to go back and look at what are parents already paying for. And, that's not insubstantial. So I surveyed our boosters clubs just to try to get a sense across all of the various teams, the kinds of contributions they make. And so, parents, for the most part, especially at the high school level, are already paying, a host of fees. And again, it's a values judgment, right? Like, maybe that's fine, because that's what you want your kid to participate, and that's just what you do. But I think you've got to answer the values question first, and then make a decision about, how much or what. I couldn't, in my reading of the history of the first time, Laura Schwem provided a little bit of color to it. But pay to participate sounds like it was initially adopted here, really as a way to try to offset, some budget reductions. And so it was an economic
So
consideration.
just in general, like, you're saying cross-country, there's no cost to be in the cross-country?
No, there is a cost. Well, so there is a cost, right? For every sport, parents pay a participation fee. It's $125 per sport. And then there is a fee for activities across the district. So
if
it's
I
all
join
in that memo.
The chess club, there's a fee?
If you are in a club at the high school, there's a fee. Right, and it's not it's not the athletics fee. But, again, when you look at it, there's one fee whether you run cross-country or play football or play hockey. It's not on a scale. And so, that's to Stuart's point a minute ago, if things are more expensive, would we, like Darien, contemplate a scale? And so I think, that's a question for the Board of Ed to contemplate.
I look at my personal opinion for what little it's worth, is that before I ever cut freshman sports or music or STEM, I would institute fees, particularly for sports like skiing and hockey, because the parents are used to paying for those. And again, if there's financial need, it should be covered. But, clearly the cost is going to get paid any way you look at it, either by the taxpayer.
Right.
Or if the taxpayer doesn't want to pay that much, it'll get cut, and instead of cutting that, you're gonna cut freshman sports. It just doesn't, that part is illogical to me. So I would be in favor of increasing the fees for expensive participant sports where they're used to paying higher fees.
Sure.
Because I just think it's a bad practice to cut the freshman sports and the music programs and the clubs.
I completely agree with you, and I'm not recommending that any of those things happen. Right. So there was a handful of infrastructure maintenance questions. We talked about some of those. So the grants and other revenue. I think I'll need to follow up with some of these things in addition. So, we receive some small amounts of money, through the state and federal government. The largest grant that we get is the IDEA grant, which supports our special education services. We get, very nominal amounts of money to support, teacher professional learning, and things like that. Through the pandemic, we received, about $800,000 or so in ESSER funds. So we, that money we utilized in the first 2 years, and so, it's gone. There is no impact from those funds expiring on this current budget proposal. We addressed that in a year ago.
Got it. So there's so the question I was trying to figure out is, because grants are tied to specific services, and so if when the grants expire, what happens to the service, right? And that was what I was trying to get to, but that's not happening this year.
No, it's not. And I think, that's, if you go back, a year and look at the ESSER funds. So those were, at the federal level, designed to support pandemic recovery. And so what did we do? We hired additional custodians, we hired additional interventionists, and then we hired, I think, one additional social worker. So we pulled a couple of those positions into the operating budget. They were offset by the staffing change at Middlebrook, but there's no impact this year.
So there was a discussion about a grant for the reading program?
Yes.
Is that not in this year?
So that money, I don't know that it's listed here, but there was, I think we received 90, what is it? Yeah, to support, so we use some of those funds to pilot some of the programs that the state, in lieu of having to purchase them. So we have some materials.
Yes, we purchased materials.
Right, so as to
Is that
support the
on this
curriculum
list,
review
or is it not
process.
on this list?
It is on this list, right here. You have the
It's the third one from the bottom.
third one from the bottom.
109,000?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. And that would grow if the program grew?
No, wouldn't that be nice? That's one time. So I think just the other dynamic that's in play and growing in Connecticut as the legislature has sought to shift, state monies to more depressed urban centers, they've shifted, grant funds away from districts like Wilton. And so oftentimes, when we are eligible for a grant, we're also awarded the grant on a wealth scale. And so our percentage in general is, pretty low comparative in terms of what we get. The grant that, is used to support the right to read legislation is one time. There won't be additional funds coming, at least not that I'm aware of.
So the law is you have to spend the money, but they're not gonna pay.
It's an unfunded mandate.
It's an unfunded mandate. Okay.
Yes, of which there's many.
One question that isn't in here, but I think you asked about the objective student, or the student, the goal, the kind of student you want or something. Do we have genius or high achiever programs? You've talked about programs
like
at the low end.
talented and gifted programs?
Yeah.
No, we don't run a formal talented and gifted program, but if you look at I think about the high school, and you look at the array of opportunities that exist at the high school. I do think we have, through the curriculum, through the extracurricular activities, there are a range of opportunities that really allow those kids to happen. I just, think about some of the art and music programs that we run, that really speak to some of our, wonderfully talented kids. At the lower schools, under the law, we're required to test, and so we have a protocol for doing that. But, what we really try to do is lean on our classroom teachers, with support to provide enrichment, to students who are academically gifted.
I remember reading somewhere that the Board of Finance was singularly responsible for cutting all the programs relating to the gifted program, which I thought was ridiculous, because it's more an allocation of staff as opposed to a additional new program, wouldn't it be? So if you did in fact run a gifted program, and you set up a class that was the same size as any other class and allocated that percentage of students, it would be the same cost. It would be an allocation of cost as opposed to a new level of cost.
That's
Isn't
right.
that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, even, again, like everything else in education, there's a lot of nuance here. And so we have to go back to, I think some folks make assumptions about what a gifted program is or should be. And again, in my experience, I have not seen very many good or effective ones. And so I would begin at the beginning. What's the aim of the program? What are we trying to do? What would we do differently that we can't do in our mainstream curriculum? And then how would we direct resources toward that? And who would benefit from those resources?
What percentage of surrounding towns have a gifted program?
I don't know. It's not something I've ever looked at. So some programs run them. And again, even if they exist, to me, a better question is, what are the aims and how good is it? And I don't know that there's any way to quantify that.
Can I ask one question on the pay to play? Is that discussion that you guys plan to have soon, or just to understand this year? Are you planning to deliberate on it, or later on?
Yeah, so you can speak for yourself as chair. The board has the information. There is not, at this point, an agenda where that's an agenda item, but it's among, many other things, it's out there and certainly can be placed on the table for discussion. I think at some point, as part of budget deliberations, before or after you set a mill rate, I think the board would decide if they want to contemplate that. I don't mean to speak for you.
I was just asking just because the timing and just to get all the facts in place as to what is the desire that you have, what are the trade-offs. I think we could have some information.
Yeah, you have the memo that I shared with the board, and that ought to answer most of those questions. It's, as we were talking about before, the next step would be, for the board to choose to contemplate it and then deliberate it.
What Prasad really wants to say is he thought that the town of Darien made a very wise decision that if Chip and Buffy want to ski and take sailing, that they should pay for it and not the senior citizens in their tax rate. That's
Right.
probably what he was
But they also
trying to
made the
say.
same decision not to charge all their athletes a fee.
Right.
So,
But for these super expensive sports, they
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, there's a formula.
yeah, there's a formula.
What else?
Any other question, guys? Tim, you've been, sorry this has been tough. I tried to send you pictures of all the materials.
We'll get you a packet, Tim.
Thank you.
You good?
Yeah, no, thank you, it was very
Thank you.
thorough preparation.
What a quick 2 hours.
Is that all it's been?
It's all it's been. It feels like 5
All
minutes.
it's been.
Sorry, 1 hour, 54 minutes. My bad.
Thank you very much.
So,
So we got some follow-up items.
yeah, so we do have some follow-up.
I'm used to yelling at my kids all day, so I don't need the microphone. So we do have time for public comments. This is a special meeting, but we have allotted time for public comment. We would ask for each speaker to be mindful of the 2-minute allocation and to please give their name and address for the record. In general, the Board of Education considers the views of citizens in its deliberations and welcomes and appreciates public comment. We listen to public comment thoughtfully and with interest. We, however, generally do not respond to public comment during board meetings by offering commentary or answering questions. We also invite commentators and the public to contact the board or the superintendent directly with any specific questions or comments. So if there's anyone for public comment, please feel free to make your way up.
And the Board of Finance as well, as we are guests of the Board of Education, we will not be responding as well.
Thank you. Monica, non-forest learning. Maximizing academic learning, reading, writing, math, science. So I guess that means you already know increasing class size does not maximize academic learning. I'm not exactly sure why it is part of this budget. We cannot compromise on essential educational spendings. And maintaining 20 students per classroom is essential. Smaller classes significantly benefit our students. K through 5, those are the classes that are fundamental building blocks for stronger academic foundations and futures. Yes, none of the choices are good choices, but some choices are worse than others, and the ramifications for our children greater. Sports are wonderful. Clubs are great. But when thinking about cuts, we have to balance out whether freshman sports affect the employability of the general student body versus, say, foreign languages. We opened our schools and budgets up for open choice, which already started, as you had said, we had 4 students in our classes already. And our homes are being reevaluated for significant tax increases. And this year, the budget is extremely restrictive. In previous years, we had a little bit of wiggle room. It is increasingly, again, detrimental to our children and their development to continue to increase the class size for sometimes the benefit of children from other towns and not our own. So how long do we intend to compromise on the quality of education offered in our schools? Yes, our test scores are great, but also many children have educational activities outside of the school because, simply put, the school has become somewhat of a social experiment, not an academic experience. So please do not let our children be the social experiment to see if this reading program works or that math program works. We know what works, focusing on academics, reading, writing, math, and science, smaller classrooms. We know this works. So we shouldn't have this as part of the negotiations and as part of the cuts. We should eliminate other non-educational expenses as much as possible. Legal fees, HR, over $250,000 we're spending on these. Is there any way that we could do better? And I'm not sure why cutting open choice is not even part of the budget. Yes, we're not increasing the budget because of it, but it doesn't mean that it is completely free. So thank you for your time. Again, my position is that we shouldn't consider increasing our classroom size, and we shouldn't consider cuts that affect the hard sciences and the long-term employability of our students. I'm not sure how many of them are going to be professional athletes or professional musicians, and I think those are excellent. But when it comes to balancing, it shouldn't be at the expense of other more employable skills. Thank you.
Josh Hessman, 241 Capitol. I'm not even sure we're keeping up with inflation in this current budget. Inflation's up. I thank the Board of Ed for coming up with a good budget, coming in 5.6. I highly encourage the Board of Finance to leave it as is. The town already has a method for us to cut the budget at town meeting. I think pre-cutting the budget before the town meeting is travesty to parents and to the townspeople who have a method of cutting it, but cannot raise it again later. I think the Board of Ed for their effort to look through, come up with a comprehensive budget, make already difficult decisions. Personally, I wouldn't charge our kids $50 for National Honor Society. I think that's crazy that we charge for club and honor societies, but we do it to try and keep the budget balanced. I think we should invest more in band, I think we should invest more in science and math. But I'll trust the experts and Board of Ed that have chosen to invest in, and I hope we respect their decisions that the town passes.
I'm Steve Hudspeth, 6 Glenville Road. First of all, let me thank you all for your service. I know how much time this takes and how much energy, and believe me, I appreciate it. I know all across the town, people appreciate it. I rise in support of the proposed budget as Superintendent Smith has presented it. And I do this specifically in this respect because I view my principal responsibility as a citizen of this town to see that our children get the best educational opportunities we can give them. And when I say our children, my children graduated in the 1990s, okay? Our children are the children of this town. They are the future of not only our town, but of our country. And they need the best from us. And the best represents what this budget, as you proposed it, Superintendent Smith, reflects. Let me go down now that I've seen some of the consequences as it's laid out. Elementary class teachers, and that one, if I understood it correctly, that really scares me. Not only for general reasons, but also because there was a letter to the editor not so long ago by a recent local arrival through the COVID times, explaining that our preschool programs are filled to bursting. They try to expand them, they still don't accommodate. Those students are coming our way. We've got to be ready for them, right? When I hear about music being considered, last Friday I had the opportunity to hear our high school students perform a concert. It blew my mind. These are incredible students. They're getting a real education. It's an education that will be with them through their whole lives, whether they become professional musicians or not. In the last few weeks, I've been going to wrestling matches. Who knew? Matt, I'm very impressed you were a wrestler.
Did we win?
I look at Coach John, I look at Coach Kurt. These are incredible athletes and wonderful coaches. And we're privileged to have them. That's a great, great accomplishment for our schools and for our students. Those are values that mean so much. They mean so much now, and they mean so much for the future. Now, Stuart, you very kindly offered me the opportunity to offer consequence questions. I am not going to bore you by reading my consequence question, but I've kind of streamlined it a little bit. This is my letter that lays out the consequence question. I have a copy for each of you. I'm not going to read it to you unless you want me to, but I don't think I have the time to do that anyway. What I've tried to do is fill in the blanks. Look, I know this is a very tough year to figure things out. Nobody knows what the delivery is, raises, blah, blah, blah. I also know that former first selectman laid out a very, very convincing way of moving forward on funding those $150 million or so capital improvements needed for our schools. So I feel very confident on that score. Bonding's not going to adversely affect it. But what I tried to do in my very simplistic way, subject to a lot of calculation of grid, put in blanks where you fill in. Now we can put in a blank to fill in what the consequences are, because you, Superintendent Smith had given us now. I asked you to do that. I tried a very rough calculation, council, this is for me. Came out to $150. That's $3 a week. I spend more than that on coffee a week, right? Sometimes I just want coffee, right? If I go to Starbucks, who knows what I'm saying? In any event, my point is simply this. When our children's futures are on the line, we should not be looking at costs as an expense, but rather as an investment. And this is the most important investment we as a town can make. Thank you for all your service and letting me speak to you.
Hi, my name is Laura Castellides. I'm 38 Chestnut Hill in Wilton. I just want to stand up and say I support superintendent's budget. Just being in the school that I, as I am in many capacities to the community, to the school, to the different boards, we are constantly hearing what's not covered in this budget. We are constantly, as PTAs, boosters, trying to make up the money that you guys don't have in the budget. So it's hard for me not to support what we consider as a very slim budget. We're all aware that our students are starting socially acceptable and, with behavior issues, understanding what's socially acceptable, and this has increased over the last few years. It's put a lot of strain on our administration, it's put a lot of strain on our staff, and these are circumstances that we need to fund. And some of this, we aren't funding it. As PTAs, we have actually written grants to try to make sure that some of the line items are covered that they need to do. Community organizations come together and put together programs of their own funding. These are things that we are constantly doing as parents to make sure that our kids are taken care of. So when we stand up here and say that we're supporting the budget, we know what's not being covered. We know where the line is. And I know that you guys are facing a difficult situation. We all read the news. We all know how it's going to affect us. But we somehow have to figure this out. Clubs this year, some of the kids are going to be over in a few minutes, so I hope you stay because I want to talk about it. It was a big hit as far as that goes. And now we're talking about taking that across the board. Clubs, when people say clubs and activities a lot, just think of different things. But these are kids that are going to state and national level. These are things that pave their way to get into good colleges, especially at the high school level. And to sit there and not understand how important it is for those, and to say that it's not academic is absolutely incorrect. I just want to say also, I think we need to come together as a community and understand we're going to keep having these discussions every year. We can't treat it separately. We need to understand how we can bring revenue into this town so our mill rate goes down and that we can pass these school budgets. And to do that, I think we have to work together instead of saying, well, that's their problem, that's their job, this is my job. I think we have to work across the lines to make that happen. Thank you.
Aaron Jacobson, 11 Bay Area Lane. I got here late, I couldn't hear the meeting because the microphones that you're using aren't working.
Yeah,
so-
Zoom's terrible, just so you guys know.
But fine. And I appreciate all your efforts. My wife went to high school, or went to Miller and Driscoll and all the schools through high school, and I have 4 kids in school now. I understand the challenges that you're dealing with, and as a father of kids in school, my kids have had some of the greatest teachers and experiences of their life, and they've also had teachers that aren't invested, that don't care about them, and that don't pay attention. This year, my daughter has been studying the same ecological issue for the entire year, and hasn't, she did learn in a few weeks, but the entire year is excessive. My son has been in a class where he hasn't learned much of anything, and some of his other classes he's learning a lot. He's a 3.9, he tries very hard. My daughter got hit in the face with a football, her teacher didn't even notice it, and then she had a bloody it's just, there's things like this, and my point is that the easy thing to do is to raise the budget, and that's not easy because I know you understand the ramifications. The next easiest thing to do is to strategically find solutions, which you've done. And then the hard thing to do is to have to cut personnel and staff. And I certainly don't want to cut any, any staff that care and trying their hardest, but if there's a way to hold teachers more accountable and that may lead to some opportunities to make some cuts and find new teachers. The teachers here are paid a lot of money, and that's why we live here. We want our children to go to the best school and have the best teachers, and I'm disappointed in some of the teachers that I've been paying for, and would encourage that hard decision to hold some of the staff accountable and find ways to make cuts. It's not anything that anybody wants to do, but sometimes it's necessary. Thank you.
Hi there, David Packer, 62 Wolfton Road. I'd like to speak in support of the budget. I think there were many very appropriate questions that were asked by the Board of Finance tonight. Long list of questions, but I think the superintendent did a remarkable job in answering all the questions. I think he came very well prepared. I think it was very clear that the budget was scrutinized inside and out, and was able to speak confidently and address all those concerns. I think the Board of Finance did its job to ask the tough questions, and I think in response, the Board of Education did a great job supporting the budget. Some of you may know I ran for Board of Finance last year, in part because I believe that there is some fear mongering going on in the town about what the burden that we put on the town by tax increases related to budgets. Mill rate is thrown about, as a proxy for what the budget increase would be for the town, and with a consistent grand list, it is a relatively good proxy, but as we know, the grand list is uncertain right now. And so I believe focusing on the mill rate is really the wrong variable to look at when trying to evaluate what the potential impact might be to taxpayers. A much more appropriate way to look at it, in my view, would be to look at actual dollars out of the pocket for different assessed home values. So one thing I did was I went into the Board of Finance budget, pulled the actual spreadsheet that was put together. Obviously, some of the assumptions that were going to change based on the grand list. But just some numbers that I put through. For the median assessed home value back in the 2018 assessment, and we know that that's going to change substantially now. But for that assessment, if you look at the delta between where the Board of Education is asking at a 5.6% increase, and where the guidance is from the Board of Finance, I believe that delta, looking at that delta is really the most important variable here. So for that home assessed value of $750,000, the difference between 4% and 5.6%, I calculated $292 a year. And that would be the difference in the property tax increase from one year to the next. For those who put in escrow their property taxes, that comes out to about $24 a month. For those who have smaller home assessed values, say $500,000, comes out to $208 a year, about $17 a month. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people, that may just be a couple of trips to Starbucks. For those with more modest means or smaller apartments in the town, $300,000 assessed value comes out to $125 a year, or about $10.5 a month. That's what we really are talking about right here. Throwing out numbers on mill rates, 5%, 6%. I heard a 10% number that was thrown out, which I just don't understand how it's mathematically possible. But really, these are the numbers we should be looking at. So I asked, can you look at the kids in the town in the eye and tell them that they have to be in larger classes, they can't have, maybe full support in clubs, and other support outside of the classroom over $10 to $24 a month. Schools in this town have been underfunded for a very long time. Year on year, if there's an individual year where the increase isn't fully received, it may not make that much of a difference, but values compound. We often fail to appreciate the power of compounding over time. So every year, if the budget is underfunded very slightly year by year, over a 10, 15-year period, it makes a very big difference. And I think it's very important for the town to recognize it. I just implore the Board of Finance to really, prescribe this sort of trade-off in this manner. I know a survey will be going out. I'm sure there'll be references to mill rates. I would like to see a table showing for different assessed values where people can pick their assessed value and look down at different increases and see exactly the dollar value of where it's going to move. I think that will make it the most clear. And so I just hope that everybody can do what's right by our
so I relate, we just came to our final senior show here, so highly advise everyone come see it tomorrow on Saturday.
What time tomorrow and Saturday?
Yeah, you have to give the
tomorrow
whole,
and Saturday, 7 p.m. So hello, my name
7.
is Sean. I'm going to be senior, I am senior class president of the class of 2024. I also head a number of other clubs, president of Science Olympiad, co-captain of debate, my partner over there, and I'm on the board of Model Congress, so I'm going to be speaking about clubs here. Talking about clubs, advocating for clubs for 3 main reasons. The first is the community that clubs provide. The second is the outside classroom experience they provide to students and students at Wilton High School to engage them with the outside world. And third is the academic progress it actually initiates in students. So speaking about community first, I think this is really the easiest one to grasp. But currently, speaking as a student attending clubs, even running these clubs, we're limited to being able to meet half of what we are previously. So what that means is in tournament clubs like debate, tournament clubs like Science Olympiad, clubs where you have to prepare every week, if not every day, to compete at these monthly county or statewide performances, you aren't able to get the preparation or even the camaraderie you usually have, typically, to learn from other people and to experience that shared leadership. And that pretty much goes without saying, because like Kate pointed out, who just spoke, not being able to go to club meetings when clubs are the only things you do really limits your interactions with other students in the school and really limits that ability you have in high school to find what you're interested in and go about. Speaking personally, I only became involved with a lot of the clubs I'm part of because of my brother, who's 2 years older than me, and his friend group. And currently, students, especially freshmen and sophomores, are unable to experience that due to budget cuts, due to meeting, maybe only twice a week or twice a month or even more time a month. So that's community there, pretty easy point to grasp. The second point I want to talk about is preparation for skills outside the class. So speaking on a debate perspective here, I think the only reason I'll be up here talking to all of you right now is because of the lessons I learned in debate, the lessons I learned in Model Congress, lessons on public speaking, on confidence, and stuff like that. And when you limit club meetings to only half the amount, when you aren't providing students with that ability to explore their outside interests, you're severely hindering their ability to get those interpersonal skills or outside academic skills that clubs are otherwise invaluable in pursuing. And what that looks like is that Wilton High School won't be doing its due diligence in preparing students for the outside world. I know that the portrait of the graduate is a really big thing we talk about in the school. When we talk about socially aware citizens, when we talk about active, healthy human beings, how can we provide that when clubs or other extracurriculars, a major portion of student life here at Wilton High, is cut in half? How can we adequately provide for our students, provide students the ability to be active, involved members of their outside community if we're severely limiting that aspect? And so, again, not allowing students to develop these interpersonal skills, or even skills to explore their interest in biology or math outside the classroom, skills that will really set them up for success in whatever career they go to later in life. So that's 2. And 3 is the ability of clubs and other extracurriculars to provide for academic progress. And I'm sure we all know that Wilton really is a town that prioritizes our education. I know my family moved here for our education, and I found the administration, I found my teachers invaluable through the process in helping me discover my interest for environmental and public policy that I hope to continue in college. But what we see is that without clubs and without allowing students these abilities to compete in statewide, even nationwide competitions, you're hindering, one, directly, immediately, their ability to compete effectively in the college admissions process, something I, as a senior, know pretty well about. But 2, you're again limiting this ability to develop these skills to help them achieve success later in life. So speaking again on a debate perspective, or even a Science Olympiad perspective, we have, well, for debate, we have monthly competitions. My teammate will talk about that later. But for Science Olympiad, we have one meeting, or one competition at the end of the year, our state competition, where we compete against every other high school in the state that has a Science Olympiad team and see how we rank up. Last year, my friend Arsh Khan and I pioneered the Science Olympiad Club, and we won Best Rookie Team of the state that year, right? So we won the statewide award only having the club once. So of course, we were overly enthusiastic about continuing this legacy forward, building on the club, trying to rank top 5. But then, now, due to budget cuts, due to only being able to meet half the time we've been able to, not really being able to go to competitions, go to invitationals, and prepare for that big state competition, we've been limiting the ability of freshmen or sophomores or even me, someone who wants to see this legacy continue, actually go about accomplishing that. And so, again, this impact budget cuts has had on clubs has limited students' exposure to outside competitions where they can hopefully win awards, compete in a college admissions process, but further discover new interests. And so I'll stop talking because I know I've been talking for a pretty long time. But from these three aspects, community, 1, 2, allowing students to explore interests outside the classroom, and 3, finally, this development for academic success and also just success in the real world, I strongly urge these budget cuts be reconsidered and the Board of Finance and the Board of Education pursue a more feasible, or I know it's complicated, but hold our students in your mind when you're talking about the budget for next year and the next school year. Because I truly believe that clubs have been paramount to my success in Wilton High School. And all I hope is that freshmen and sophomore and all incoming students can accomplish the same amazing things and experience the same amazing things I have. Thank you.
My name is Sid Sneja. I'm a graduating senior this year at Wilton High School, and as my friend Sean mentioned, we're both co-captains of debate. And I want to talk a little bit about my history and how things like debate have helped me instrumentally, not only in this school, but in the college application process and in the outlook of my future. First, I want to say I have immense respect for the teachers and for the school members of this community. You know, my family moved here from a few thousand miles away and chose Wilton specifically because it was a place that valued education. And I felt that value throughout my life, and I'm very thankful for where I am. But I wouldn't be where I am today if not for the clubs at Wilton High School and the clubs at the middle school and what clubs do for students. As a middle schooler, I wasn't a super great public speaker. I ranked consistently, I think, in the hundreds in debates, which kind of sucked. It was pretty demoralizing, but I usually like, trying to climb those mountains. And so by the time I got to high school, I was very determined to make a change. And when I won my first debate in high school, it was the most confidence-inspiring event I think I've ever had. And from then on, debate served as a source of inspiration for me and confidence that helped improve my grades, helped improve my determination, and many other things that I've seen happen in other students as a leader of debate. And as we've gone into leadership of debate, Sean and I, in the last 2 years as board members, we've seen an incredible growth in our success as a club, especially on the state level, being debate state champions, being ranked top 50 in the country as speakers, and we've seen our name in the newspaper so many times, and that's helped us get so many more kids to sign up, and it's helped us get more kids to buy into this idea that you can develop skills that you can't develop in the classroom in clubs like debate in ways that I did as I did myself. And last year, we had an amazing run where every single Thursday, kids were coming in debating seemingly innocuous things like who's going to win, Pac-Man machine to a golf cart, or Batman with blindfold on, And it seems like that doesn't really make a difference. Why do we need to give funding for students to come into the high school on Thursdays and talk about Batman and Pac-Man? But what we saw was students develop confidence and the ability to speak without saying and freezing up. And we were incredibly proud to see our kids sweep the Ivy League National Championship and to do incredibly well in the state tournament. I'm pretty sure last year we brought home 25% of the trophies available at the novice and varsity levels of the state tournament. And it was an immense source of pride for myself, and it has an immense source of pride for a lot of our students. And that's why so many of them have flourished in the real world and in the application process. A lot of the kids who end up being our board members or captains or successful in debate end up going to schools that are incredibly great because they do so well in the real world because of the confidence they build in our clubs. So what I ask of you guys is that you consider our experience and that as students, especially as someone who had a lot of trouble in the classroom as a kid because I had a lot of attention issues, I've been coming to this high school since I was 4, going to Hindi classes every Friday. And I can tell you, if my best friend was taking a test with me, the score was guaranteed to be below 50, to the point that my mom would walk into the exam as like the coordinator of Hindi USA and take me out and make me go to a different room because I couldn't pay attention and I didn't have the determination to really make the decisions that I needed to make and do what I needed to do. And things like debate not only built that determination in me, but built my confidence that I could do something good. And I've seen that confidence in so many kids. I saw it in so many kids last year. And as board leadership in clubs like debate and mock trial, it's very, very hard to see that same level of enthusiasm and the same difference that's been made this year when we haven't been able to connect with them as much, when they talk about Batman and Pac-Man half as much, and when it's much harder to go to debate meetings. So I do have an immense respect for the teachers, and I know that our school values teaching and in classroom and things that will make our school be better and make our town be better. But I encourage you guys to consider clubs as an integral part of the student experience, because it's not just what you learn in school, but what you learn outside of school hours that can change who we are as students. So, thank you.
Any other comments? Oh,
Has to follow those guys.
I know. Tough act.
Nicole Wilson-Spiro, 14 Comstock Lane. And I want to just start, because I don't think I'm going to get this opportunity again. We moved here when my oldest was in second grade. She's now graduating this year, and I'm never going to get all of you in a room together, so I'm just going to start by saying I was thinking that it's a little bit like that Play-Doh fun factory that they had when we were little. Like you take this little malleable lump of clay and you stick it in there and you're like, hope that it's gonna work. And I didn't always understand all the twists and turns, and maybe sometimes I disagreed, but whatever you are all doing is working. It's really, really working. Not just my daughter, but those kids are her friends, and she's got this huge group, and I'm so proud of the kids that are graduating this year. They're rock stars individually, they're rock stars as a group. My two younger ones think they're rock stars, literally, they look up to them. They are articulate, they're kind, they're cohesive, they score awesome on every test out there. And I know that in our society right now, it's hard for us to trust authorities about anything, but I trust you. What you are asking for is exactly what we should give, because these people over here, they know what you're doing. And so I think it's our job as a town to do whatever we can to give them the resources that they need, so that when my little list comes through, I can say the same thing again.
Any other comments? Sure.
Obviously, I'm so sorry for being a little late, but hi, my name is Thomas Fletcher. I'm this year's president of German Honor Society, and in relation to the threat of further budget cuts, I wanted to make note of how it's been affecting everyone, including honor societies, which are supposed to be held to a certain degree of prestige within the school especially, and are supposed to help out the colleges, and they have, unfortunately, with the half cut, I suppose, of convening time, it has put a very large dent in everything from fundraising to volunteer opportunities to field trips to even the ability to further yourself in the subject in which you're involved in the honor society. I know that a lot of people missed out on the National German exam this year because of the fact that there was not as much of an ability to advertise it and branch out. But beyond that, I truly don't believe that cutting the budget as is to a lesser degree is by any means necessary something that would be beneficial for schools, especially considering the fact that we have quite literally just started to recover from the real of both emotional and logistical issues from this year's past budget cut. I would thank you for your time. I'd also like to just quickly make a motion to advertise the senior show just tomorrow. And I truly hope that I can see as many of your lovely faces there as possible. Thank you for your time. Thanks, Thomas.
Are there any other comments in the room? Hearing none. Seeing none. Don't have my. Is there, I don't know if we have the.
Everyone raised their hand. You got one.
Is there a way to acknowledge someone who's raised their hand on the Zoom for a comment?
No audio.
Hopefully you could hear us for most of that, Tim, since you said that at 7:06.
That was from the beginning.
With that, it's 9:32. Thank you, everybody, for a really engaging discussion and evening. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.